Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a great place to live, that build our communities. Today we have a special guest director. We want to thank Lenore Raum for coming from Woonsocket to be with us. We want to also give the word out of health and well-being to Vern Stromberg, who is recuperating from an accident, and we're sorry that our director is not here. Today, we're going to be talking about somebody who wants to transform public space in a way, to make us see our city differently, to allow us to enjoy art right where we are, right as we walk down the street. We're going to be talking about the Avenue concept with Yarrow Thorne, and we thank you very much, Yarrow, for being here and for what you're doing for the city of Providence. Thank you. There's so many creative things happening in the city, but you've got to be one of the most spectacular, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have to say, as I looked at your website and thought about you, having not met you, I thought, who is this guy? So can you tell us a little bit about what helped you to become sort of the ultra humanist that you are, or the person who really supports art in places that have never been thought of as artistic before?
Wow, that's hard to follow. For me, my greatest strength is being dyslexic, and I grew up with a lot of learning disabilities and being told you can't do this and you can't do that. So I was always outside the box. I was always coming at a problem from a different vantage point. And with my parents both being architects and designers and teachers, they were also doing the same thing. So I had a house of designers and artists that were constantly coming up with different ideas. And it just inspired me to walk down the street and understand an alleyway isn't just an alleyway. A park bench isn't just a park bench. An abandoned area in a city can do so much more. And it doesn't just have to be asphalt or concrete or a building. It's really about what your imagination is and how you'd like to see it transform itself.
So you took your past, your growing up, the sort of the DNA of your life, the environment of your life, and you built it into something that was really transformative that nobody's done. Well, they have. In the past, it's been buildings that were beautiful or parks that were beautiful, but not this kind of painterly presence that would normally be part of a museum.
Well, I think the difference between what I've done and what the Avenue concept has done is that we're investing in infrastructure that allows art to be sustainable, and something that allows a 100-foot mural to be painted or a 20-foot tall sculpture to be installed in a sustainable way, so we can back it up with programming, we can back it up with connection to community. We can do all those parts and pieces. In the past, there have been some past arts installations like Convergence in Providence, Rhode Island, where they installed hundreds of sculptures, but there was no infrastructure to support that. There are no avenues or ecosystems that allowed those things to thrive. And that's what we're really working on and what we're excited to be a part of.
So you're looking at context.
Correct.
Okay. So is this art related to the ancient arts of making buildings and things beautiful? Is this the same kind of concept, to say the human being needs to be inspired constantly or can be inspired constantly?
Oh, I definitely believe that, 100%. I think you can go back to ancient ruins in Greece or in Egypt, and you walk around those streets and you'll see pieces of art carved in walls or sculptures and statues. And the art really needs to connect to the community of the era and the time. I think Providence had an amazing period of time of creative people that lived and worked here with the Industrial Revolution and all the technology that was done here. But for me, when I came here, moved here as a RISD student and decided to stay, for me, the art of downtown did not connect with the people that were living here now at this time period. And I felt the city needed a contemporary art collection and a way for people to really tell stories based on what their interests are now.
I may not be too complimentary to the spaces, but you take spaces that really are kind of eyesores, and somehow you've got these all cataloged, I guess. And so things that have parking lots and lots of fencing and just blank walls, brick walls that aren't kept up, you see that as a canvas.
Correct. So for me, the beginning of the Avenue, or for the last 5 years especially, were about doing research. Instead of doing just renderings and looking up books, I had 10 years of research ahead of time. I helped start the first public art program at RISD as an undergrad. And when I got the Rauschenberg Seed Grant, I said, let's take this to a much larger scale. Let's look at the city as an entire canvas. And at that time, I'd been hearing a lot of conversation from city planning and people in City Hall that Providence was set up at a time when it was very linear, and there's Westminster Street, Washington Street, Sabin Street. All of those things are very linear. There's not a lot of reason to walk out of the PPAC and walk to Westminster Street, or to walk out of the Civic Center and walk across the city instead of just up and down. And I felt that public art was a great way to start to connect some of those dots. So in the beginning, we wanted to bury the art. We wanted to go into alleyways, into parking lots. We wanted people to walk around and not be expecting it, and all of a sudden see something light up and surprise them, and for them to also want to walk into a dark alleyway, which maybe they wouldn't want to do the week before when the mural wasn't there.
So is the city having to do things to work with you? I don't see the city as responsive, very responsive to things.
Yes.
I see them as constrained by finance, but also by imagination.
Correct.
And so the city is going to have to start helping you, but you've taken buildings and reconstructed walls, haven't you?
We have, yeah. Most of these projects are 5 or 10-year projects. There's a lot of behind the scenes that are going on. And because of my background as my parents as architects and as a designer, I don't want to take shortcuts. We could go out and do what we do in half the time, but for me, that's not sustainable. What makes us work, or for me, I won't take on a project unless I know when we go to rotate these pieces, all of these amazing murals that are downtown are going to come down at some point. All the sculptures that are up right now are going to rotate in 6 months or a year and a half. We want to be able to come back the year that we want to redo these pieces and not have to have 5 or 10 years of red tape or policy to start and work through. We want to go up and start doing the work itself. And that really takes time. And it's a way that we feel that we can help the city, we can help our state, we can take that risk, and we can try and leverage dollars and really understand the value of the work and the impact it has on our community.
So the word sustainable in farming means that you plant things that will continuously grow.
Correct.
And what you're saying is sustainable here means that it's politically sustainable.
Correct.
Meaning you can work with whatever government is in power.
Correct.
But also it is sustainable in that the public will help to sustain it, I assume.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, there's, for me in the beginning, and a lot of the research was looking at existing contemporary art installations or sculpture parks or museums even. And many of the large sculpture places around the country or in the world are not in the public realm because it's too complicated. You expose yourself to everyone's emotional connection with their work. They hate it, they love it, and that can be really hard to raise money around. And for us, I wanted to change that model. And the idea of rotating to a temporary art installation instead of a permanent art collection, it allowed us to take more risk. It allowed us to put stuff up. Maybe it fails, maybe it succeeds, but we learn a lot from that process. Every pad that we've installed is all different. Every mural that we do has a different vantage point, has a different scale, has a different size, tells a different story. And every single time we're out there in the public engaging with people, we're constantly asking questions and really trying to learn as much as possible.
So the site becomes the museum and the canvas and the space of learning. It becomes a school. Correct. As well, an educational school. And so the more people that live downtown, down city, in Providence, the more care you will have of these art projects, I assume. In theory, that's what we're hoping for. I think for the past 5 years, we've been really lucky because we were able to connect with some true champions that had the ability to travel the world and wanted to see the contemporary work that they see around the country or in Europe or in other places, and they wanted to see that here in Providence. So we were able to raise private dollars to do those projects. Now that we're outside of that fund or that round, now it's back to our community and our city. Is this something that people really value? Do they want to see more of it? Is there going to be an opportunity to open up more doors or to really take what we've learned in the last 5 years and really scale it up? So it sounds as though you're at a turning point, or you don't want to be, but you are.
Yes, we are at a turning point, but I think that's part of how cities work. It's how countries work. It's how communities work. And just yesterday, I was in Pawtucket City Hall having a great conversation with their whole executive team and looking at Pawtucket as an amazing city full of creative people. They're learning or trying to connect with that creative sector. How do you take the stories of those people and really magnify those in a sustainable way? And I think Providence has been trying to do that for over 100 years, but there's a lot of other counties in Rhode Island. There's a lot of cities, and they all have a story to tell. And you can either do it through media, you can do it through art and design, you can do it through creative partners. For me, public art can be that neutral, leveling system. You can kind of put it in there and it's a filter. So it takes the highs and lows throughout the day, and it can really make it a nice even curve, something that you can leverage against, that you can raise money against, that you don't have to be there because it's only there for a weekend, like a music festival or something else. It's going to be there for 6 months or a year. So you can come out and look at it in the fall. You can look at it in the spring. You can look at it in the summer. You can bring an orientation for brand new freshmen coming into a brand new school and then go back to it in 3 or 4 months and continue to talk about it, have it as part of your life.
I see Pawtucket as a city about to grow. The same way that Providence has.
Correct.
I'm sorry the Paw Sox left, and I think that's really hard for the city. But bringing a project like Avenue into this city would make a huge difference because of all the mills that are there. You could start there.
Correct.
And then the down city area is trying very hard to grow. So we can watch that ourselves, can't we?
But it's a lot of risk, and I think those are some of the challenges. We as an organization, we want to play that middle ground. We want to help facilitate or be that buffer. And as much as the city really wants to use their creative community as that sort of conduit for conversation, it can actually be really hard because artists and designers don't necessarily have the ability to meet OSHA standards or to have insurance or not get paid for net 60 or 30. And organizations need to kind of step in and fill that gap, be a little bit of a buffer.
Have you looked at the WPA and seen how it works? You must have.
No, I don't know the WPA.
Works Progress Administration?
No.
Okay, it was after the war, World War II. It was put in by Franklin Roosevelt, and it hired artists. And if you go, for example, to many mailbox sites or post offices, train stations, you will see WPA art. And they also built walls.
Wow.
This was artists, this was artisans.
Correct.
Using the city as their place to get their bootstraps pulled up.
Wow, that's
so that
great.
they could, maybe that would be something, but that's what I thought of when I saw this. I thought, wow, this is the WPA again.
Correct.
Because when we had our 2008 crash, whatever it was, and every bank was given huge amounts of funding. To me, what we need to do is give the schools and the artists funding instead, or half of that, and at least begin to build our cities again in new ways and to see our cities again in new ways. The WPA would have done that. I don't know how it was funded. I know it was federal money, but I don't know how it was funded. So,
well, in 2015, we did a study with two of the largest public high schools in Providence, Central and Classical High School. And we noticed that there was these unbelievable environments between the schools. They were designed in the brutalism era, and they're high maintenance now. And we saw that there's a lot of gray paint on the windows and walls, and it was a very negative environment for the students. So we approached them and said, what if we took the budget that you use to roll walls gray, we match it with private dollars, and we connect it with alumni and paint murals that have curriculum attached to it. And one of the murals that was inspired by an alumni of Classical High School was actually razzle-dazzle camouflage from World War II era, where they hired local designers in America to try and hide the way ships traveled through the ocean by very large graphic design patterns. And this artist was inspired by this and actually painted a big part of the school with all of these colors and all of these patterns. And now you can walk through that space even 3 or 4 years later, and every teacher has a curriculum now that you can go talk about art history, you can go talk about graphic design, you can talk about color theory, but you can also talk about naval history. You could go to the Naval Museum or the Naval Academy in Newport and walk around their museum, and you can see all these razzle-dazzle ships and this time period. That's really amazing.
Well, I hope that one generation inspires another. I mean, that's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So is there a dichotomy between public and private art?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think in the old realm of public art, there definitely is. I think being on private property or inside a closed gate, it's not open to the public, and not anyone can see it for free. And I think allows an institution or a school or a place to take more risk with that, because it also gives them more responsibility to take care of it. When you put something out in the public, you open the doors up to anyone's comments or feelings or ideas about it. And that can be really risky. It can be a real challenge to put things out there that people might not know about. They might not know the context of it or the stories about it. And you hopefully will inspire people to really ask questions and to come back to you as an organization or as a community.
I always think about destructiveness and teenagers, and I shouldn't say it's just teenagers, but people who will do something destructive to a piece of art. Does that concern you, or is there some kind of a surface that you put on after the art is installed that will make it washable, or are you protecting it in some way? I mean, here you've built this wall up, you've whatever you do, you put new molding, or what is it called, between the bricks, and you've made it beautiful in terms of masonry, and then you've put art on it with lots of thought.
Yeah, so for me and the organization, we do not want to put coatings on murals. And what we found is a lot of those coatings can be very expensive. They don't work that well. And it can make your life really hard when you go to repaint the murals, because all of these pieces are temporary. For me, in a perfect world, as you put art in a community, the community becomes ambassadors and take ownership of each piece. If you do the curating right, if you get the word out there, if you find the right story to tell, which can be very complicated and very hard, the community will really take ownership of it. And we've seen that from a lot of different murals in smaller scale. People really like to be out there in the middle of the night and sort of watch it for people and watch it for us. And to date, we carry a maintenance budget for every installation we do. We take on that responsibility so the city, the building owner, doesn't have to worry about that. It's also part of why we rotate the murals. It's more affordable and we think more interesting to actually have the mural repainted entirely and change the story, change the content. And that's also as people get more connected to that space. As an example, this mural that was on the cover of our new magazine actually was defaced for a period of time, but through our connections with the artist was in New England for another commission, and we were able to connect with him. He came down in person and repainted the mural with the paint and original style, and now it's clean again.
Tell me a little bit about that artist.
So this artist that you're looking at here is Andrew Hem, and he's an artist from California, but he grew up in Cambodia. He was smuggled out of Cambodia during the genocides, and that sort of content has always inspired him as an artist, and he's always been fascinated by the storytelling and connecting with people. This mural you see in front of you is called Misty Blue. It was the first mural of this scale that he's ever done, so we're really excited to have him involved with the project and the avenues.
It would be a whole different painting process, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Yeah. Okay.
So this wall itself was a big project for us. It was a wall that was outward facing instead of sort of buried in an alleyway or a hallway or an environment you couldn't necessarily see. So we wanted to take a little bit more risk with it. We wanted the artist to really tell his story in the way that he wanted to sort of inspire himself. He actually came to Providence with a very different rendering. And by connecting him with elders from the Cambodian population in Providence, he actually changed his entire design on the fly and came up with this idea.
So the average person would not know that it's related deeply to another culture.
Correct. Well, we found from this process, Rhode Island has a very large Cambodian population that lives around Providence and in the different areas. And for a while, they didn't have a sense of ownership for anything downtown Providence. And now with this mural there, they have a sense of connection to downtown. And when he was there painting, or even afterwards, we've got hundreds of people would come down to see the mural, to meet him as an artist, and are taking pictures or talking about it on social media. That's just another story, another chapter to tell, and it's a way for us to connect.
And it's talking about people who transform our culture from outside of it, which is so important a message right now.
Correct.
Maybe you can find another picture in here that we can talk about. I'm sorry, I'm doing it slowly.
Do you want a mural or do you want a sculpture?
Sculpture would be fine.
Okay. This is actually a really neat one that we did.
Okay.
So this is a project that we did, and a little bit of a backstory is when we got involved with Kennedy Plaza, and Kennedy Plaza was being torn up in 2013, and RIPTA had a federal grant, but they had to repurpose a bunch of the signage and shelters that were in the city itself. And they couldn't find anyone that wanted the signage because it was outdated and the shelters were too large. So I worked with RIPTA, helped them rewrite the way that they term reusing it, and got them to donate the old signage to us. We then turned around, incorporated that sculpture or that scrap metal and signage into a medium that we had two local artists in residency in partnership with the Steel Yard, another local organization. So two young women who have never made sculpture before were given a pile of old signage and old shelters and came up with this original piece of art 2 years later. And with a stipend, they got paid, they were able to do something they've never done before, and in turn the city has turned around and gotten this unbelievable 20-foot tall sculpture that was installed back into downtown Providence. That sculpture wouldn't be here today without the partnership with RIPTA and their vision to sort of step outside the box of what repurposing signage or old shelters were. We also feel that it's a way for them to get access to that federal grant that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise because they couldn't find anyone else to take that. In turn, that sculpture came out and rotated around. This past year, we installed a new iteration of a sculpture made from the scrap from that sculpture itself. We were able to activate another two young women who are actually at RISD, and they just installed it about 2 weeks ago.
So we all need to go see it. What streets is it on?
It's on the corner of Broadway and Empire Street.
Okay. So you also find partnerships and funding streams continuously, I assume.
We try to.
You have miraculously raised, what, $1.5 million?
About $1.5 million, yeah.
That's just amazing that any individual person could move into a city and then start developing an arts program. You probably have secrets that you don't want to share, but basically you have a lot of very generous people in this city who are concerned about art.
Yes.
Which is kind of another foundation as well as the cement that
correct
holds the sculptures.
Yeah, so at the time we learned that there was very little funding to support this type of public art vision, and we also learned about a couple champions in the city that were really interested in seeing contemporary art because there wasn't a public art policy or any language or any real opportunity for the city itself, the state, besides the 1% program that RISCA was doing with the federal buildings. There wasn't even an avenue or a stream to even start the conversation. And I spent 8 months working with a couple of people to really understand their vision for public art, what they thought would really help the city work, and also push back a little bit and wanted something to be not just about public art itself, but really about the environments that public art could operate in and how to build something much larger than all of us combined. With that, we set up the first public art-related fund at the Rhode Island Foundation, which in 100 years has been an amazing sort of keystone to a lot of amazing projects in our state. But to date, they'd never had any fund, donor-advised fund, anything that supported the arts or public art in in any way, or shape, or form. So we worked with them for a period of time to set up the first donor-advised fund for public art, which we've sort of turned into a seed fund to continue to support the work that we're doing, but also other organizations that are interested in urban art and art in public spaces.
So if anyone is interested, they can look online and find out ways to donate.
Correct.
Which you would be most appreciative of.
Yes.
I just want to read your credo for a minute.
Okay.
We believe art belongs in public spaces. Both art and public spaces belong to people, bring people together, and I wrote in build community, which is what I believe. They extended community. Public art enlivens and improves cities and adds value to public spaces. Public art should invite and engage interaction, not passive observation.
Correct.
And that's a very interesting thing. I don't know if you have little groups that gather from time to time around a piece of art, but I imagine that happens. Certainly groups of visitors who come through. And art tells stories and creates dialogues. As you tell about the artists and the struggles that they have had and what has happened to them before that art happened, you realize there's a huge backstory that is just as beautiful as the work that's on the walls.
Correct.
Or that's in the sculpture. So what age artists are you looking for? How do you look for artists? You hear that somebody's wonderful in Spain and you invite them. Is that what's happening?
Well, in the past there was a lot of reaching out to artists, trying to get galleries, trying to learn about what's going on out there in the world. You know, a small example of Mass MoCA, amazing institution out in Western Mass. You know, learn about sculptures that were sitting in storage that no one could see or understand what's going on with it, and that someone's paying a lot of money to store it. So they said, why don't we build a huge environment, activate a mill complex where the art, instead of being stored at an expense to somebody, can be stored for free, and through a museum, hundreds of thousands of people can be inspired by it.
Is that how that museum started? That's very interesting.
There's a lot more parts and pieces to that, but that's one of the general ideas to it. Sort of looking at, there's a big challenge here in how this model works. And for me, there's a need to, how can you build something similar but outside? How can you make it so it's really public so everyone can have access to it? Part of that story was we also wanted something that would inspire people. The idea that 10 different people would walk up to this corner that have never been there before. Someone's inspired by, you know, the kinetic side of gray area from George Sherwood, which is downtown right now. It's one of our first kinetic sculptures. Someone's fascinated with the perennial gardens and the grasses and the colors and the textures. Another one's fascinated with, you know, sort of the wayfinding aspect of it and looking at QR codes and sort of having this treasure hunt around the city. And they're all there inspired by what's on the corner. And all of a sudden they turn around and they have a common ground. They have a common interest, a conversation. And they meet someone they've never met before. You know, and we want that to happen day in and day out.
I bet it does. But we have to stop. And I don't want to stop because I think we could go on for 2 hours. But I want to thank you, Yarrow Thorne, for your vision, for your parents' vision, for the people who work with you, for the artists. Thank you so much, and I'm sure that Pawtucket and Providence appreciate what you're doing, and you certainly are one of the treasures of our city. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching Good News Rhode Island. I'm sure there's good news and art and public space around you. We hope you help to make it more beautiful. Thank you for watching.